Welcome to the Midi Quest Studio window tutorial. The Studio window is the central control area for Midi Quest. It's where you install instruments into Midi Quest. It's where you configure the basic instrument settings. It's where you load data from an instrument into Midi Quest from. It is the central control window for the program, and by default it's the first and only window that opens into the program when it is first run. So we'll have a look at the basic layout of the window. The window has a list of your installed instruments. For each installed instrument, there you can click on this lower area and it will give you the available sets, a custom set option, as well as a list of the individual components that go up into making that instrument. So the DX7 is very simple. If you're to look at the Motif ES, then you have a more sophisticated pop-up. You have two different sets, your single custom set, and a much larger list of components, the various types of instruments that you can data that you can load from the instrument. Now a set here, these two options, are different configurations of data that you can load. So the default set typically loads all of the different user types from an instrument and places them all in a single window. So for example, let's look at here, let's just create a new one. And here our set is comprised of a performance bank, the current performance, the user banks, a user voice, the drum bank, single drums, and some other configuration information. Or you can alternately choose a RAM plus ROM set. And you can see here what you get actually is a much larger collection of data, which includes song bank, performance bank, and all of the preset banks, and so on. Now, one of the primary things that you're going to do from this window is to bring data from the instrument into the computer. And this can be done quite a number of different ways, so I'll look at this first. In order to bring data from the instrument into the computer, I can, first off, you select what it is that you want to load. If you want to load the default set, select default set. You can double click on the icon and that on the instrument graphic, and that will load whatever is selected here. So we've loaded in the voice bank and the voice and the current voice for the DX7. Alternately, you can click on the Get button, which does the exact same thing. Or from the menus, you can go to Instrument 2 and you can get the set from the instrument. Oops, we've got a dropped byte. Let's try that again. There we go. Or you can do the same thing from the MIDI menu and choose Get Set from DX7. All of these accomplish the same thing. And unlike most of the windows in Midi Quest, they have a single pop-up menu. You right-click anywhere in the window and you get the option menu for that window, and it's the same as what you see in the Studio menu. In the second menu of Midi Quest. The Studio window is a little bit different. If you right-click within the instrument graphic, you'll get options that are specifically related to the instrument. If you right-click on the Get button, then you'll directly load data for a set. However, if you have an individual component selected, then what you get is a pop-up menu, and with a different set of options. First is to just get the bank or the type of data you have selected here from the instrument. You can create a new collection and load the selected data into that collection, or you can load into a SysX view window. You get the same type of option here. You have a new button, and if you have a default set selected, then pressing new will just create a new set, whether you left click or right click. However, if you have a component selected, you get the options to create a new editor, create a new library, or create a new collection. And finally, open again works the same way. If you have a set selected, you get a pop-up menu that allows you to either open up a set or open up that set and transmit it directly to the instrument. Or if you have a component selected, then you have a larger slate of options. You can open data directly to an editor, open and transmit to the instrument, open the data and view it in a SysX view window, and 3 special import options. Open MIDIX to editor allows you to choose a MIDIX file that contains a DX7 voice bank and load it straight into the editor. Open MIDI file to editor will open a MIDI file that has a DX7 voice bank stored in it and open it in the editor. And the final one, open headerless SysX file to editor, allows you to open a binary data file that has just voice bank SysX data that doesn't have a header or a tail, and you can load that straight into an editor. So far we've been viewing the studio in what is called set mode. That is, you can create new sets, or when you load data, you have a set option and you create a new set. The studio window actually has 2 modes of operation, and if you shrink the window down, you'll see that at its minimum it goes into an alternate display mode. Now this is called the collection mode, and what happens here is you can, instead of creating new sets, Midi Quest will create new collections. So you have a number of different options here. For select, you can select a range of, what you have here is, instead of there being a list of individual instruments that each have their own pop-up list of components, you expand each list here and you get the appropriate components for that instrument. If you want to, say, load a single bank and load it into a collection, you can go instrument to collection, which you saw was faded out in the earlier part of the tutorial. So in this mode, you can create collections in a sophisticated way, and most people work in sets, and this allows you to load in set work with sets or work with individual instrument components. You are also able to do extended selections. So you can do things like, if you want to do extended selection, you need to have the components you are selecting need to be sets. So I can actually select these two items and I can create a new set that has both a DX7 in it and an access virus in it, and I can switch between them just by clicking on the graphic. And up here it will tell me what type of data I'm currently looking at, as well as the instrument graphic here. So now that I've worked through some of the basic aspects of the window, I'll have a step-by-step look at the various functions available to the studio. When you first run Midi Quest, the first thing it asks you is what instruments you want to install, and it gives you a list and you can select these. This is handled automatically, but this kind of functionality is also available from the studio window and the studio menu. So the first option is Add Installed Instruments, and what this does is it gives you a list of the instruments that you've actually already installed, either from SoundQuest's website or from the Midi Quest CD. Now, in my case, I actually have all of the instruments that Midi Quest supports installed. Most likely you will have a much smaller list. Then you can choose one or multiple instruments. You can click and drag, hold down the control button, and make additional selections. Hit the OK button to add all of the selected instruments in, or I'm going to cancel here. The next option is Remove Selected Instruments, and what this will do is any instruments that you have selected in this list, I'll choose the Proteus and the M1 and select those and choose Remove Selected Instruments, and it simply takes those two items right out of the list. Remove All Instruments does exactly what you might expect. It takes every instrument out of the list. I'm going to say that I don't want to do that. Install Instruments From allows you to install new instruments into Midi Quest, and this can be done one of three ways: from CD, from disk, or from SoundQuest's website. Now, if you select CD, what will happen is Midi Quest will ask you to insert your CD and press the OK button, and it will go to the CD, get a list. I don't have a CD inserted right now. Get a list of all of the instruments currently on your CD and present them to you in this list. You can then select which items you want to install, then press the OK button to install whichever instruments you've selected. If you want, you've got an Install From button here that would allow you to actually change the path to any location that you want on your computer, and you can install instruments from that location. Now, the Install From CD option is really exactly the same as the Install From Disk option. The only difference is the default path. So here I've asked to install, and from this path, eMidi Quest, I have one instrument that's available to install. I can choose to either just install the instrument, or if I have this button checked, it will install the instrument from whatever folder into Midi Quest's instrument module folder and automatically add the instrument into the studio. And finally, this button presents with a folder selector that would allow you to choose any folder that you want to be where Midi Quest will give you the list of available instruments to install. Now, this option is very useful for those of you who have a computer that you're using for music that is not connected to the internet. Any instrument updates that are available for download, you can use your browser, go download them, put them on a CD, put them on a USB key, whatever you want, copy them onto the hard drive, use this selector to choose the folder where you've placed those newer updated instrument files, and you'll get a list of them, and you can select whichever ones you want to install and install them. The final installation option is SoundQuest's website. And what this does is present a dialog that looks precisely like this. The Midi Quest will go to a SoundQuest website, get a list of available instruments, present them to you, and you can download what you need. Now we have a number of default options. When this dialog first comes up, what you will get typically is a list of the instruments that have been updated since the Midi Quest CD was released. So only those that have received changes. That way you can just select the instruments that you need, that you own, that have been changed, and install them. Right now we have all of the instruments listed because I'm running a version 10 beta, and the beta simply accesses all of the files. Now there are alternate connections. If you want to click this button, whoops, that one is for updated instruments. Clicking this button will get a listing of all the available Midi Quest instrument files, and you can download whatever you need. And the third option will take you to the Visor FTP site, which will have instruments that have been released for specific instruments, usually as third-party releases that you can download and add into Midi Quest at your leisure. The fourth option, if you know of a specific FTP site that has Midi Quest modules, they have an SQZ extension, you can type in an FTP site, a directory, a username and a user password, hit the Connect To button, and Midi Quest will connect you to that FTP site, list the available files, and then it's a matter of you downloading and installing them. Once you have files selected, you can either optionally choose to add them to the studio, which you will normally do, or uncheck this option if you just want to download them. Press the OK button, and it will take the instruments from the website, download them, and install them into the studio window. This way is usually your fastest, easiest way to get instruments installed into the program and to keep your modules current. Plugin registration, I expect, will be covered extremely well in the specific plugins tutorial. Essentially what this option, Midi Quest supports a range of plugin options, and here what you can, and normally registration is handled automatically. So as you add an instrument into Midi Quest will automatically configure that instrument to be available for use as a plugin for MFX, for studio connections for VST based on your preferences settings for plugins that are set up here. So right now all three are set. Every time I add an instrument into Midi Quest, it will automatically configure the plugins for these three different hosting environments. And same thing when an instrument is removed from the studio, those instruments are removed from the plugin environment as well. Now, if you say started off and hadn't set any of this up, you can simply select any combination of instruments you want. You can choose to register those selected instruments for all plugin formats, just studio connections, just MFX, just VST, or you can choose, say, the reverse. You can say, all right, I don't want these selected instruments to be registered for use in Sonar's MFX MIDI processing environment anymore, and this option will manually remove the registration information so that the plugins for those specific instruments will no longer be available. If you want more information on plugins, how they work, how you set them up, please watch the plugins tutorial. Select gives you a group of options for selecting elements from the studio window. You have all. When you're running in combination mode, you can automatically select all set banks and singles. You can select just banks or just singles. You can also set up or select a custom set, and you can also make a custom set. And what these two do is you can actually decide what elements you want to be part of your set. Choose Make Custom Set. Whoops. So everything must be set up as a set in order for this to work. So I could set up a couple of alternatives just for fun. And I can now make a custom set. I'm going to just call it my first custom set. And now, if I choose custom set, there I have an option that allows me to automatically configure the set exactly, the sets for each of the instruments exactly as they were previously selected. You also notice that when you do that, each of these is set up as a custom set. Now, we haven't talked about custom sets, and you'll see the custom set option is this one here. And what this allows you to do, in Midi Quest, you can make a set is any combination of the available components for that instrument. So DX7, there are only two components. There's a limited number of sets that you can create. But for an ES6, you've got a lot of components, and you may want to create a very specific configuration. Now, if you have Midi Quest XL, it's easy. You can open up the instrument creator, select any instrument, and all of your sets, along with their selections, are listed here. There's your set. Here, the highlighted elements are the components that are a part of that set. If you own Midi Quest XL and you want to create a set that you plan to use frequently, then you can just create a new set here, create a new set, add it, select it, and choose whatever components you want to become part of that set. I'm going to get rid of it. If you have just Midi Quest, or you're doing something that you know is temporary, you're not ever likely to do it again, then what you can do is choose Custom Set. Oh, let me do it with a larger group of selections, Custom Set. You can then pick out whichever elements you want to be part of that set. So the highlighted components are part of the set. Press the OK button, and the next time you ask to do something that generates a new set, those components, the ones that you've selected, and you can view them anytime you want, are the elements that will be part of the set. The settings options relate specifically to the currently selected item or instrument. And if you look at settings, you can access the information from here, or you can right-click on this button and you'll get the same options. If you choose this item settings, you'll get a dialog that lists all the options. You choose the port, the MIDI in port that the instrument's connected to, the MIDI out port that the instrument is connected to, the COM channel to communicate with the instrument. That is the channel that the instrument communicates system exclusive on. Sometimes that's the exact same channel as the MIDI channel. Sometimes there is no specific COM channel. That was common with early Alesis instruments. But most frequently, it is actually a channel that is independent of the MIDI channel. Yamaha calls it a device number. Roland usually calls it a unit number. For Roland, the range is usually 17 to 32, where your MIDI channels are 1 through 16. Because different manufacturers all call it something different, we settled on a standard term and we call it the COM channel or communication channel. So this is the channel that the instrument communicates sysx information on. MIDI channel is the channel that you want the instrument, the editor to use for auditioning and other purposes, and the editor needs a MIDI channel. This is the default channel. Once you have an editor open, you can actually always change this to your liking. Patch number is a single variable that is used by some instruments to allow you to make a selection. Most frequently, it allows you to say you've got a driver or a component that loads in a patch. And this component is designed that it can load any single patch from the bank memory. Well, you're going to need to be able to choose, do you want to load patch 1, patch 5, patch 10? If that is a feature available to the component, this option will be available and you'll be able to click on it, get a list of the available selections that you can make. And here, I can show it to you here. Here I can load in any patch from 0 to 35. So if I wanted to load patch 3, select 3, press the OK button, and then when I try and load the data for this channel, it will load in item 3, and you'll see it shown as the pop-up in the pop-up as well. back up here. You'll notice you can also, I am right clicking to get the pop-up menu, but by default, if I left click on that button, you automatically go to the settings. Patch bay control. For those of you who've been around a long time, you may own a patch bay. A patch bay is not a multi-port MIDI interface. A patch bay is a separate piece of hardware that connects to your computer's MIDI interface using a MIDI cable. If you have this kind of piece of hardware, you will need to control it in order for Midi Quest to load data from your instruments. This enables you to do the setup and control of the patch bay. If you'd like more information on this, have a look at the Midi Quest online help. You can press the help button here. Now, for those of you who aren't so hot on dialogues and would like to work from pop-up menus, you can choose your COM channel from a pop-up menu, your MIDI channel from a pop-up menu, a MIDI port from the pop-up menu, MIDI in, and MIDI out port from the pop-up menu. You can also, for any individual component, specify whether it is currently a set member and whether it is to be auto-loaded or not. And the final option is Auto Sense Settings. You'll notice that it's disabled right now. This option is only enabled when you have defaults a set mode selected. And what this does is it automatically goes out and queries your instrument to find out what MIDI import it's on, what MIDI output it's on, and the SysX channel or COM channel that it's using. And here it's basically saying it's successfully found the instrument on USB MIDI 1x1 in and out ports on COM channel 1. You just hit the OK button and it will set up those three parameters. Frankly, I find it is usually easier if you know what the MIDI in and out port and COM channel are for your instrument. Just go into the settings, choose them. It's this parameter, this parameter, this parameter. It's a lot easier and usually faster than having Midi Quest try and find this information for you. The next option is Fast Tips. Now what Fast Tips does is it brings up a help file, usually text, that gives you setup hints for configuring your instrument. These tips are not only instrument specific, they are usually component specific. So you'll see right now this says voice and voice bank. So there's only one Fast Tips for the DX7. But if I look at, say, the ES6, and I choose Performance, I'll get a Fast Tips that is set up for the Yamaha Performance and Performance Bank for the Motif ES. And if I say select a voice bank, and then request Fast Tips, and I'll do it pressing the button, I actually get a different Fast Tips help file. Now, usually for each instrument, much of this information is usually the same. It will tell you what you need to set up on the instrument in order to get Midi Quest communicating with it. So if you've got to correctly set COM channels, it should tell you what buttons you need to press on the instrument to find the COM channel on the instrument so that you can either match Midi Quest so that the COM channel is the same as the instrument, or you can modify the COM channel on the instrument so that it is the same as what you have selected in Midi Quest. It will tell you if you need to do something special with the MIDI channel. It will tell you if you need to say enable or disable protection options on the instrument and so on. These are usually important. You should, especially if you're having problems loading data from an instrument, that's your first source of information. Choose the instrument, hit the fast tips button, or get fast tips from the menu. Read what it has to say. The next option, Instrument 2, contains a submenu of items. You've probably already seen this referenced a number of times. The first option basically says, get set from Yamaha DX7. So what it will do is it will create a new set and attempt to load it from the instrument. It's the same as pressing this get button, and we've actually already looked at it before. Oops, we haven't successfully loaded it. So let's try it again. Okay. Next is the collection option, which is only available when the collection is active, or we can choose SysX View, and what this will do is load the data. SysX View is only available when you have bank data select or individual data selected, so we'll view individual data, get SysX View, and we'll have to retry. There's your data that's being loaded in. If you've noticed during the course of running this demo, there have been a number of load errors. The application that is actually recording this places an awful lot of weight on the computer, and this is resulting in dropped bytes when I try and load in data from the instrument. So it is certainly possible to have SysX receive problems when you have something like video recording happening in the background, and that is actually to be expected. There's not much you can do about it. From a Midi Quest point of view, keep this in mind. Sending is never a problem, it's only receiving, so you'll be fine when you come to playback. If you're working with video in your sequencer and you're running Midi Quest, don't be concerned, that'll happen just fine. But during recording, you may want to stop any video processes that you have running. The next menu of options is Open. And Open Editor brings up a file selector. And Open Editor is smart in that it looks and sees that you have voice bank selected here, and you're asking to open an editor, so Midi Quest will automatically take you to the DX7 data folder. It will automatically select the voice bank type, and then it is just a matter of selecting the data file that you want to open. And I'll close this up. And as I said, this is type sensitive, so if I choose voice and go to open, choose editor again, now we've got a list of the available voices that can be opened instead of the available banks. And if you choose a set, open will now say set, and it will give you a list of the available sets. Library does the same type of thing. we're opening from disk, it will find the appropriate. We have a set selected, so in this case it's going to open it generically. But if we choose voice and ask to open a library, which is the same as right-clicking here and choosing Open Library, then we'll automatically go into the DX folder because we've got DX chosen, and here is a list of the available libraries that can be loaded. The next option is Collection. It's always active. It will automatically take you to the Collections folder, and you can choose any collection there that you might want to open into Midi Quest. And there's a collection. Open SysX View. Again, you get a file selector. Takes you to the currently selected type. Select a voice. Oops, and it didn't find it. So let's select another one. And there is the data stored in that file, displayed in a SysX View window. Now, MIDI-X, I'm going to set this up so that you can see how it works. I'm going to open up a bank, and then what I'm going to do is actually export it as a MIDI-X file, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. So I've just created a MIDI-X file on my desktop, and if I choose MIDI-X, I'm saying I've got data that I know is a DX7 voice bank, and I know it's in MIDI-X format. Can I please open this right up into an editor? And if I go to my desktop, here's my SYX file. This contains no MIDI Quest information whatsoever, but MIDI Quest is still able to open it up as an editor. Now it's important, you are specifying, you are telling MIDI Quest that you know what is in the file, and MIDI Quest cannot always load these files, but if it's possible to load it, MIDI Quest will load it directly into the appropriate editor. Now, if you get into a situation where you've got a file, SysX data file, and MIDI Quest is giving you an error when trying to open it, you can always go to the MIDI menu, choose Transmit MIDI-X file. You get a file selector, choose the file, send it down to the instrument, and then use MIDI Quest's regular tools to reload that MIDI-X file, which you've now sent down to the instrument, back into MIDI Quest, and you should be fine. This option is just a slightly faster way of doing things. SMF MIDI file, it's the exact same thing. If you've got a standard MIDI file with the DX7 data stored in it, then let's do another little demo. We'll open up the same file. We'll export it as a MIDI file, and we'll put it on the desktop. Hit save. So we now have a MIDI file that just has a DX7 SysX dump stored in it. And I can go open, standard MIDI file, go to, whoops, that's not what I want, go to my desktop, load it in, and MIDI Quest has extracted the SysX data out of the standard MIDI file and used it to open up an editor. And the final option is import headerless data. This one's a little bit different. I'm not going to give you a demo because Midi Quest doesn't output in this format, but if you have a data file that you know contains raw sysx data but doesn't have a header. Now, Unison will save individual banks, individual voices in this format. You can import that data directly into Midi Quest as well using that import function. New, you can create a new editor, create a new voice library, or create a new collection with these menu options. Obviously, creating a library is type sensitive, so if you want to, say, create a new motif performance, you can choose a performance. You can create a new library this way from new library, or create it this way, new library. And there's a motif ES performance library. Now, the reason you're seeing some overlap here is that the Studio window was designed to be a plugin to other applications. So you can sometimes have the Studio window running within another application where options in the file menu aren't available. So in order to be able to access these options, such as opening files, creating new files, we've provided these from the Studio menu as well. Utilities menu. From the Utilities menu, you can open up a MIDI controller window, open up a sequencer window, or open up a MIDI monitor window. And these are all equivalent options that you'll find in the Utilities menu. So to recap, the Studio window is where you handle all of your basic Midi Quest setup from. You add instruments, remove instruments, configure instruments from this window. You load data from an instrument from this window. You can load files from disk from this window, much the same with the ability to be very specific about what type of data you're loading. That means that you can get to your data faster. You do all of your basic instrument setup through the settings button, or this gives you the identical settings dialog. The buttons allow you to get data, create a new type of data, whatever is selected, or open that data up from this file. The menus also give you options to handle, well, adding and removing. We've talked about with these two options, you can actually move an instrument up or down in the list. So if you want your, and these two are available only from this pop-up menu. If you want your access virus to be the first element in the list, you can move it up. You can move it down. The only limitation here is if you want to move instruments, you must have them all set up to be used as sets. And you can alter the order, do fast tips, create new elements. Don't forget about the pop-up menus for each of these items. And that covers the Studio menu. Thank you for viewing.